You are listening to episode 137 of the Autism Mom Coach, How to Stop Catastrophizing. Welcome to the Autism Mom Coach podcast. I am your host, Lisa Candera. I am a lawyer, a life coach, and most importantly, I am the full-time single mother of a teenager with autism. In this podcast, I am going to share with you the tools and strategies you need so you can fight like hell for your child without burning out. Let's get to it. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the podcast. I am so glad you are here, and I hope you are doing well. For this week's episode, I am going to replay one of my very first podcast episodes about catastrophizing. In this episode, I go deep into what catastrophizing is, why we do it, why we think it's useful, and the very practical things that you can do when you find yourself in the loop. This is a really important episode because it dives into the actual science behind why we as human beings catastrophize. It's not just because we're autism moms. It's because our human brains like certainty, and in the absence of information, we will fill it in ourselves. And then we have these things called the negativity bias. We are biologically wired for survival to overfocus on the negative. And then comes confirmation bias. This is another cognitive distortion that has us looking for the information of the thing that we already believe, finding that information and filtering out information to the contrary. All of these things come together in catastrophizing. That's why catastrophizing is so freaking scary. How you can actually take your own breath away, make your heart beat so much faster just by doing this act in your brain. So in this episode, I break all of that down and I take you through some very specific examples of what happens when you're catastrophizing and the things that you can do instead. For autism moms, this is such an important skill to have because catastrophizing, that chatter that goes on between our ears, is stress-inducing. It keeps our stress levels up and it also keeps us in this constant state of hypervigilance and reactivity. And for us, we already have a good dose of that in our lives as it is. So adding to it really isn't helpful when it comes to our capacity to show up to the day-to-day challenges of parenting our child or children with autism. Now, one of the things that I do hear from parents all the time is that they believe catastrophizing is useful. They believe in some way that it's preparing them. They believe in some way if they scare themselves enough, then they will somehow work harder, figure the thing out, and the thing that they're so afraid of won't happen. That's absolute garbage. That's not true at all. That is all the kind of logic that you get when you're listening to your fear brain. Your fear brain is that part of your brain, the limbic system. That's the part of your brain that is in control when you are in a fight-flight response. I can't stress this enough. When you're in that fight-flight response, you do not have access to your highest level of rational thinking and problem solving. Instead, you just have whatever that lizard brain is feeding you. And usually it's a lot of this will kill you, this will be horrible, and watch out for life. Thankfully, we all have a prefrontal cortex. We all have the ability to step aside from that. And for autism moms, this can be very challenging because we live with high levels of stress as it is. So it doesn't take much to put us over. That is why this is such an important practice for you to have, to be very aware of where your brain goes, the shit that it's feeding you, and to have the skills to interrupt it and redirect it. This is how you rewire your brain. And I want you all to think about this. For all of the time and all of the energy that you put into therapies of whatever kind for your child, that's exactly what you're trying to do with them. You are trying to wire new habits, new skills, over and over by repetition. It's not glamorous, but that's the way you do it. It's the same for you. And just like your child does not have to do this on their own, in fact, many of our children have a team of people to support them. Neither do you. I can help you with this every day, any day in my one-on-one coaching practice. It's what I do with my clients every day. I help them work through their stress and their anxiety. I teach them how to spot and rewire these habits that are keeping them in a constant state of hypervigilance and stress. I teach them everything I've learned in my time as an autism mom, but more importantly, as my time coaching autism moms just like you on these issues. I coach myself on these issues. I am my first client. And I coach my clients on these things all of the time. And so I know that if it's happening to me and if it's happening to them, it's happening to you too. And you don't have to do this alone. You could, and I will tell you from experience, it's usually not as effective and it's definitely not as much fun. So this is your opportunity to interrupt the cycle for yourself and to have some help doing it. I am currently accepting one-on-one coaching clients, and I would love for you to be one. To get started, all you need to do is schedule your complimentary consultation call with me by using the link in the episode notes or going to my website, theautismmomcoach.com. The consultation call is a chat between the two of us where I get to understand deeply what your pain points are as an autism mom, what your goals are, and we talk about how I can help you. If this all sounds good to you, I will tell you more about my program and we will discuss next steps, but only if that sounds good to you. No matter what, you will leave our conversation feeling lighter, feeling seen and heard, and feeling understood. And for so many of us, that's not something that we get from the people in our lives. That's why that is my gift to you, this complimentary consultation call. You can schedule your call now, again, by going to the episode notes or my website, theautismmomcoach.com. All right, now let's talk about catastrophizing. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the podcast. I'm so glad you are here, and I hope you are doing well. Today, we are going to talk about something I think we all do, which is catastrophize. We think up worst-case scenarios in our head, and then we put ourselves into a full-blown panic thinking about them. So let's say you get an email from your child's teacher and immediately you start worrying that your child has done something wrong and they are going to get kicked out of school. Or after a few months of speech therapy, you tell yourself that your child will never speak, they will never be able to communicate, and their lives will be terrible. When you do this, you are catastrophizing. So let's just start with a definition. Catastrophizing is a cognitive distortion that prompts people to imagine all of the possible negative scenarios that could happen and emotionally react to them as if they are real. Now, catastrophizing is incredibly common. Remember from episode 4, negativity bias? Our brains are hardwired to focus on the bad stuff. This is because once upon a time, the tendency to focus on the bad was essential to our survival. And now, thanks to evolution, our brains are still constantly on guard and scanning for danger. The problem isn't so much the catastrophic thoughts themselves, but the fact that we tend to buy into them. Remember, we believe our own stories, and when we believe them, we ruminate over them, even when no actual threat is present. And the fascinating part is, our brains don't know the difference between an actual and imagined threat. Your brain just knows what you tell it, and when you think about the worst case scenario happening, your brain actually thinks it's happening. This is why your heart starts to race and your throat catches a bit. Your brain is releasing chemicals into your body, cortisol and adrenaline, which are the stress hormones. And then your body, it actually feels like something is happening to you because it is. You're having a chemical reaction to the thoughts that you are having about something that's not even happening. Before I share with you how to handle worst case scenario thoughts, I want to tell you what I don't recommend. I don't recommend that you tell yourself, oh, just don't worry about it. It probably won't happen. And this is for 2 reasons. First, I don't know, maybe it will happen. Maybe you're catastrophizing about your child getting older or getting bigger, or your child's life when you are no longer around. And chances are, hopefully, all three of these things will happen. Your child will age, they will grow, and they will outlive you. And even for the things you may be catastrophizing about that aren't certain to happen, telling yourself it won't happen usually doesn't work. It feels like empty reassurance, and your brain is likely to pop up with, well, but it could. It happened to someone else I know. And then your brain goes out searching for all the ways that it could possibly happen, and you're back in that loop. The second reason I don't say assure yourself it won't happen is because whether the thing you are catastrophizing about happens or not is really not the issue. The issue is that you think catastrophizing about it is useful in the first place. And it's not. It is really just a way to scare the shit out of yourself now in hopes that this will make it less painful in the future. Or that by scaring yourself now, this will somehow prepare you, or maybe even prevent the thing from happening in the future. Okay, so here is what I do recommend for you when you are having worst case scenario thoughts. First, notice the worst case scenario thoughts and name it. In this step, we want to separate the act of catastrophizing from the thoughts you are having. So let's say you find yourself spinning about how awful it will be to find another school for your child if they are removed from their current school setting. As soon as you notice the thought, stop and name it. I am having a worst case scenario thought about whatever it is. In this case, the school placement. So just to give you an example, I do this every day with my son with his OCD loops. And OCD loops and worst case scenario thoughts are very similar, if not actually the same thing. They're really similar because what happens when you're having an OCD thought or a worst case scenario thought is that your brain is telling you, this is really important. This is urgent. You must think about this now. So let me give you the example from my son. Let's say he is looping over whether he said sorry to one of his friends. He will ask me over and over. He will try to tell me the story again and again, giving me more and more context each time. So here's how this plays out. I pause him and I say, Ben, what's happening here? Now, Ben knows the routine, so he will usually reflexively respond, OCD, then launch right back into the loop. And so again, to slow him down, stop him and say, what's happening specifically? And Ben will respond with something like, my brain is telling me it is important to tell you this and to get an answer, and that I will feel better if I keep talking about it. That is OCD. And this is the distinction we are working to make. Because really, it doesn't matter what he's looping about. The issue is that he's looping about it in the first place. Second, now that you have named it, decide, do I want to hang out with this thought, or is it time to redirect my brain? Here's how it plays out with us. I will say to him, okay, now that we know that this is OCD and your brain is trying to tell you this is important, what are our options? Do you want to redirect your brain, or do you want to hang out with these thoughts? Sometimes he's able to redirect himself to one of his strategies rather quickly, like distracting himself or just saying no. But sometimes he wants to hang out. It feels real and it feels urgent and it feels important to him. And this might happen to you too, especially when you first start practicing the skill. So, okay, fine, let's hang out with the thought. But here are the rules. If you want to hang out with your worst case scenario thoughts, you have to play them out all of the way. This is because when you are catastrophizing, your brain doesn't actually take the scenario all the way. What usually happens is it ruminates about the thought that you find the scariest or the saddest, and it just loops there. It doesn't play it out. So that is what you need to do. So going back to the example of the phone call from school, let's just say your child gets kicked out of school. Now what? Do you say, okay, thanks, and read up on homeschooling? Or is it possible that you would contest the decision? Maybe you hire an advocate. Maybe you enlist the school to identify another appropriate environment for your child. Would you probably manage to find another school? I'm not saying this is a pleasant situation. Trust me, I've had this experience a couple of times. But a child being removed from a school usually is not the end of the world. And in fact, it can be an opportunity to find a school more suited to the child's needs. Not only that, but if your child did get removed from their school and your thoughts are, I can't handle this, then that's what you're going to make come true. Remember the little engine? If you think you can, you will. If you think you can't, you won't. Either way, you are right. This is because if you think I can't handle it, it's going to produce a feeling of hopelessness. Then you're not going to take any action to help yourself, and you are way more likely to end up with no options. Whereas if your thoughts are, I'll figure this out, then that's what you'll do. Your thoughts will create your reality because they will motivate you to take the actions that will create the result that you want. Or let's just say your child doesn't speak. This is the case for some children with autism. They remain nonverbal. Does this mean that they will never communicate? Might they be learning ways to communicate in speech therapy? Might you obtain an AAC device or make use of PECS, sign language, or some other modality for supporting nonverbal communication? Is there evidence in the world of people living lives without speaking? Might your child be one of them? Again, this is hard. It's not what you expected, and it is scary. But what I'm saying is if you're going to hang out with these worst case scenario thoughts, play it all the way out and get concrete. Don't just accept your brain's story that this is clearly a life-ending disaster or that you are powerless. Next, I want you to give equal airtime to other possibilities. When you are spending so much time with your worst-case scenario thoughts, you're not even considering other possibilities. And guess what? If you're not opening up yourself to other possibilities, you may never even let them in. Remember, our brains search for evidence to confirm what we believe to be true. This is called our confirmation bias, which is another cognitive distortion that we'll talk about in a later episode. So, if we spend all of our time in worst case scenario land, our brain will be looking for evidence to confirm whatever stories we are telling ourselves and filtering out evidence to the contrary. So if you're going to let your imagination run into the future, which is really all just a fantasy, let it tell you another story as well. For example, if you're telling yourself that your child getting removed from their current school is a terrible thing, consider that they might not get removed in the first place. Consider you may identify a school you prefer over the current placement. Consider a different placement might serve your child better. So again, accept the premise. It might happen, but don't accept the premise that it's automatically a disaster. Accept that it might happen and then follow it all the way through mentally to see what you actually need to do. What actions would you need to take? What would you need to decide ahead of time? This is going to free you from all of the anxiety and fear about the catastrophizing. So, to recap, notice and name it, decide, Am I hanging out with this thought, or am I going to redirect my brain? And then if you're going to hang out, play it all the way out and give equal airtime to other possible outcomes. Now remember, it is human to go to the worst case scenario. So don't be surprised when these thoughts pop up, because they definitely will. This is okay. And the more practiced you get at redirecting your brain and playing the scenario all the way out, the more automatic it will become and the less overwhelming these worst case scenario thoughts will be. All right, good luck, and I'll talk to you next week. Thanks for listening to the Autism Mom Coach. If you are ready to apply the principles you are learning in these episodes to your life, it is time to schedule a consultation call with me. Podcasts are great, but the ahas are fleeting. Real change comes from application and implementation, and this is exactly what we do in my one-on-one coaching program. To schedule your consultation, go to my website, theautismmomcoach.com, work with me, and take the first step to taking better care of yourself so that you can show up as the parent you want to be for your child with autism.